Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sanjay Kumar with Commoner Group. We are an agile transformation and coaching company based out of Chicago and Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm here again to introduce our third speaker of the Agile track, Tom Wessel. He's the president of Southern Fried Agile. And Tom Wessel has more than 20 years of experience working in the software development field, spanning multiple industries. His experience spans the entire end-to-end software development lifecycle, with experience in program and project management. With over 9 years of experience as a Scrum Master, Agile trainer, and Agile coach, Tom has worked with various size organizations to plan, implement, and train them on Agile principles and evolve their Agile discipline. Please help me welcome Tom from Southern Fried Agile.
So today's topic is basically using Agile lean techniques to effective strategic planning. So how many of you in the room today, it looks like a pretty rough crowd. I need to put on my glasses so I can actually see you pretty well. How many of you are using Agile today in some form or fashion? Okay, good. Now, from that perspective, how many of you are using it at the team level? Good, and that's probably the majority. What about at the program level? And what about, yeah, I like that. And what about at the portfolio level, at the top of the house? And that's kind of what, one person, did I see something new, or was that just a spasm? Okay. So let's start at the program level, since that's where I think the threshold is. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing from a program perspective with using Agile? Just out of curiosity.
If we were told you're going Agile, right, like management team, and everybody said, what does that mean? And it means different things to different people. And so we're all going this way, that way, and the other way. In absolutely various.
Okay. So really kind of a top-down mandate. From just a traditional change management perspective, why is that a bad thing? And it's just kind of the dictate comes out.
Because there's no reinforcement, there's no consistency, there's no repeatability, there's no reproducibility. It's all, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think? Or if he outweighs me, then his vote counts my vote.
Okay. And this guy over here, is that
Yeah,
your pointing to?
my friend is over there.
Is he a tough guy?
He's well known in the Agile community.
Okay. No, okay, good. So what else? What are some of the other challenges? Okay. And so kind of,
The organizational change is hard to come by.
it is.
Well, it's a great thing I read on the plane, but I don't know, I don't want to spend the money on it. I'm still interested in it.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Joe. Yeah, I agree. And so, actually, what you guys bring up is a totally unrelated topic, but I think it's to the heart of it, which is basically change management. I see a lot of people moving to Agile, but like anything, what is the urgency? How do we align? Whether we use an ADKAR model or a Cotter model, what is the reason for the change? And I hate the word better, faster, cheaper. That's usually management speak for how can we get a lot of, how can we squeeze blood out of the turnip. And where I'm saying this kind of out of scope, because that's key. Agile will most likely not succeed or not realize its full benefit unless it's treated as any other change effort. That it takes time, it takes energy, it takes pain and suffering, but it will happen. And so what I wanted to kind of phrase this was, I think to Joe's point, I think a lot of people get the team thing, but you're starting to see it, especially over the past several years, an emergence of frameworks that help us scale from the team to the program to the portfolio. But what I want to try to do is just give you a survey, for lack of better words, just ideas of, at the end of the day, how do we actually use Agile lean techniques to basically move the company forward? Because it's great that we have it in pockets and areas, but that's really a sub-optimization. If the company has strategic initiatives, how do we actually make sure that those initiatives have the right focus from a person perspective, from a people perspective, from a funding perspective, and we can get a large group of people moving in the same direction. And one would argue, whether it's Agile, lean, waterfall, doesn't matter. Just doing that in general is a hard thing. But I think if we start to take a look at where Agile and lean techniques are going, they're definitely being applied across that vertical. And so right now I'm working with a current customer that it's actually kind of nice. It's actually senior leadership is giving very good reason why they want to go Agile. And the teams have already picked up a lot of it because they say, hey, this makes sense developing software. Where we're seeing the challenges of what we call that frozen middle. I'm a functional manager. What is my role now in this new world? It's a very important role. But everybody needs to understand, why are we changing? What are we trying to achieve? And how do I play in this new world? Otherwise, if we don't understand that, we're not going to support it. And sometimes we're going to resist it because we're naturally resistant to change. Like I said, that's a completely separate topic, but it's the most relevant one, I think, going into this discussion. This assumes for the fact that maybe everybody's on board, we've drank the Kool-Aid, but we've done more than that. We see the direction we're going. And the company I'm working with, I can't disclose too much information, but they're a very wealthy company. They're very, very successful. But they also, too, realize that in very short order, they're going to get their ass kicked. Oh, we're being recorded. They're going to get their buns kicked. And the reason for this is it's hard to create a sense of urgency when you're successful. It's very easy when your back's against the wall, you're on a cliff, and we understand what that burning platform issue is. But if you're very profitable, how do we actually know? We can see the future and know that if we continue the business the way we are today, we are not going to be successful. Because there's going to be a group of kids in Silicon Valley that will allow someone to do what we do today and make a lot of money on it. So I admire where they're going, and it's actually refreshing. But let's go to the next slide. We can skip this one. So here's our agenda. I believe we'll sort of adhere to it. Understanding inspection and adaptation, continuous planning to manage uncertainty, identifying funding strategic themes, implementing strategic themes, and value streams. So this one gets to the point where if we are trying to move the organization toward a specific goal or goals, are we really going to put up the actual resources, people, money, etc., dedicated to reaching that objective? This is key. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then limiting, what's the cadence, limiting with, and then really how do we measure our goals? So this is a survey class, and so, or a survey workshop. Out of the 300 slides that I need to get through in an hour and 20 minutes, I want you to be very interactive, so ask questions and so forth. Some of this material you'll already know. Others that maybe need to, let me know. So this is kind of a trial run. Keep going, please. So go ahead and read this quote and let me know, do we agree with it or not? Does it make sense? Hey, thank you. Anonymous is me. I just made this up. But it's irrelevant. If we click through the companies, these are some wonderful companies. I think there's 5. Just as an example, these are companies that, one more, that, I grew up on. I mean, Kodak is to me awesome, and it breaks my heart. I used to work in the electronic publishing world, digital pre-press, worked at Adobe and Quark. And to me, I love this, but the fact that they didn't adapt to a changing market quickly enough is just a sad thing. You see this with BlackBerry. The CrackBerry, when Oprah first introduced this on her show, and everybody loved that tool. Now you look at it, and I see it, I hate to say it, I see executives that have these. It's like, dude, that was so 10 years ago. Do any of you have BlackBerries? Blockbuster. I used to love just going into a Blockbuster to look at the videotapes and just hang out. It's great. Same with Circuit City. I go to Best Buy now. But each of these are examples of companies that, from a strategic perspective, lost their way. And to me, that's a senior leadership error. What companies do you see out in the horizon or right now that you think are a threat because they're not evolving quickly enough? Oh, brilliant. Yeah. That's sad, isn't it? Because I remember getting my first one of those little radio kits. Yeah. Okay, who else? Kmart? Yeah, Sears. So it's sad because I think, sometimes, maybe it's society too, and the fact that from an investment standpoint, we need to have quarterly profits, and being tactical from a quarterly planning perspective can really jeopardize strategic initiatives. I'm sure there's a multitude of variables. So if we hold this as being true, then we think about companies, organizations as complex systems, and the world in which they exist are basically highly complex. And I want to define complexity as highly variable. There's no way that we can predict the future. So we have to continue to go through, inspect, and adapt to steer our companies in the right direction. Next slide, please. So whenever I need to be inspired, I go out to despair.com. Anyone go there? So I love this one about adaptation. The bad news is robots can do your job now. The good news is we're now hiring robot repair technicians. The worst news is we're working on robot fixing robots. We don't anticipate any further good news. So I periodically go out to the Guardian, it's an English newspaper, and they actually have a little application you can type in to find your job and what's the percentage that it'll be replaced by a robot in 20 years. So I think we're okay. I think we're good for the next 20, but after that it gets sketchy. Next slide, please. So embrace uncertainty, and this is kind of the fundamentals of Agile for those of you that have already drank the Kool-Aid. This is nothing new to you. But I think from a project management perspective, and when I say this from a software perspective, first picture, please. Is software development more like this or like this? So what are the two pictures that we have? Who's a big fan of soft serve? Yeah, that's the only reason I go to a Chinese buffet. So is software more like a manufacturing setting, or what do we have on the right-hand side? Yeah, so we got weather. And if you go out to weather.com, I think this is Columbia, South Carolina, so a little local promotion. But when you go out to weather.com, how far in advance does it show you Charlotte's weather? And what happens after the 10th day? What do they do? Yeah, good luck. So this is one thing I want to talk about. Certain things that we do where it's basically very predictable, defined process control, mechanization works really well.
You're saying if we can plan our project 10 days at a time, we're in good shape.
Yeah, or if you eat more soft serve, you can do better. So I think what we need to realize in this... Pardon? Yeah. Exactly. So I'll show you a couple other slides that kind of get to this. But the idea is that, why did Agile, at least in my opinion, emerge? Is because we tried to take something that was defined process control, which works really well if you're making watches, if you're manufacturing something where it's a very predictable process where we can follow a certain set of steps and there's a little variation. It's brilliant. But when we start to apply it to things like software development that has high complexity, high variability, and we try to predict the future to a certain degree of accuracy, we're just playing games with ourselves. And I think you guys get that. And what I want to kind of transition to over the course is how do we do continuous planning to improve our strategic and tactical aspects of it. So if we could go to the next one, please. So has anyone heard of the cone of uncertainty? Yeah. And this is a good visualization. I think what we try to do is we try to lock in everything at the beginning when we know the least about it. And the reality of it is we need to basically get into the discipline of continual planning. It's good to plan. We've got to plan. And Agile is all about planning, and I'll emphasize that in a few slides. But the idea is that as we encounter the real world, we have to take that feedback and revise our plans on a regular basis. And so what they're basically saying here is there's a huge standard deviation or variability at the beginning of the project because we know least about it. But as we get closer to the end, things become more concrete. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, etc. And so we need to adopt that framework. So I'm going to give you a really cheesy analogy for those of you men in the room. If you have a girlfriend, a wife, a boyfriend, that's okay. Let's say you got a cocktail party coming up. And your significant other basically says, hey, honey, there's a cocktail party in 3 months. I'm going to give you a budget. I'm going to sit you down for an afternoon, and we're going to go through the requirements of what this dress should look like. And then I trust you so much that I don't need to see the dress or try it on until the day of the event. So what is the probability that you will get the right thing? Okay. What would be a better approach?
Here's the money.
Oh, but okay, yeah, so let me put some stipulation. She can't shop.
Oh.
You've got to do it. And what's a good amount for a cocktail dress? 500, 300?
I'll take
Take 500? Okay. So you spend all afternoon with your significant other, you watch shows, you look at magazines, they have very clear requirements. They have words and pictures that are going to drive them toward that perfect dress. But you're saying that, hey, if I just let them go and come back the day of the event, then most likely they're going to get the wrong thing. And I see this time and again with large organizations where they're going to say, here's $1 million. We're going to spend some time with you defining what it is that we want. And we'll get back to you, or get back to us rather, in 6 months, 12 months. And their hope is that what's in their mind's eye is what we're going to deliver. And the reality is it's not. So what's a better option? Yeah, exactly. And this is the beauty of it. Sometimes if we lock and load what we, capture what we happy rewards at the beginning, when we just mindlessly move toward that. And, number one, we're not getting feedback cycles. So as you start to bring various dresses back to your wife, and you start to get feedback, you're going to realize over time more clearly what she wants and really what she needs. And maybe at the beginning, she wanted that black cocktail dress. But at the end of the day, as we went through iterations and got closer to the event, she ended up with a green evening gown. So in other words, she got what she really needed instead of what she wanted. And that's basically what I want to kind of emphasize today. For those of you doing Agile, that's basically the premise here, is the fact that number one, we need an adaptive way to do software development because it's complex. And at the end of the day, we're delivering value to a customer. And by pulling them into the process, sometimes kicking and screaming, and getting those feedback loops is imperative to success. Otherwise, we're just increasing the probability for failure. Next slide, please. So traditional waterfall, we've seen it, we love it. Joe, you're probably good at remembering this. Where did the actual definition of waterfall come from? It was from a study. 1978, I think it was in an addendum or something to the paper, or a statement that he made that this may not be conducive or successful for software development. Good. So how did it get into our system? How did it get into our DNA from a software perspective? Okay, good point.
The Department of Defense made it a standard.
Excellent, good job. Yeah. And so that's where we roll. And so when we start to see this waterfall approach from a lean perspective, and even from an agile perspective, or just an efficiency perspective, it's very inefficient. Because usually in a software project, at what point in the project do we actually get a sense of really where we are? Is it during the planning, the analysis, the design? Okay, test. And why is it? Okay. So this is where reality kicks in. I like to refer to like percent of completed requirements and design. Those are comfort food metrics. They make me feel good. It's like macaroni and cheese. I'll stuff my face with it, but at the end of the day, it's just empty calories. I'm going to feel bloated and gross. But I'll feel good. I'll be riding high for a little while until the poop hits the fan, literally. And then, so I think at this point, what we want to do is we want to shrink these cycles. The other thing that naturally happens too is the fact that we have people working in silos. So, and we have information handoff. When you were a kid in school and the teacher would whisper something in one child's ear, they'd pass it all the way through the class. The story at the end was usually a bit different from the story at the beginning. Anytime we have information handoff, it is a source of waste. And so what we're trying to do in Agile, and you guys are aware of this, is shrink the cycles, create a cross-functional, dedicated team that actually goes from concept to cash, and try to do that as best we can within the constraints of the organization. That's the general idea. And so maybe what we can do, and we'll talk a little bit more, is instead of delivering value in 12 months, could we actually deliver a smaller thing sooner to get value sooner, get feedback sooner, and then follow that up with subsequent releases? And we'll talk about minimal, or MVP, minimal viable product, a little bit later. Next slide. So strategic themes, and what you notice, I've been getting kind of lazy in my old age. Instead of building a bunch of graphics, I'm just stealing now, but I do give attribution, so I won't get legally see. So this comes from Scaled Agile Framework, and there's many different scaled frameworks out there, but I thought there were some good things here. So this is key. If I've got an organization, and it's basically realizes that we're in a competitive space, and every year, or whatever our budgetary cycle is, and maybe we do this obviously outside of budgetary cycles to start with, what are the strategic themes or themes that we need to focus the energy organization in order to remain relevant? And everything we do, once we've decided on that thing, everything that we do should be in support of that thing. It's interesting right now that the customer I'm working with, they're going through performance reviews. For those of you that do performance reviews, it's really fascinating to see what you're getting assessed on and how it looks like nothing like what the company's actually trying to achieve once it gets down to your level. Well, where I'm going is, if we're truly serious about meeting strategic themes, we have to have dedicated focus, and we'll talk a little bit more. But let's look at some of the definitions. Specific itemized business objective, new business differentiators that connect the portfolio vision to the evolving enterprise strategy. Provide business context for decision-making within a portfolio. Effective investments of value streams, we'll talk about that. And serve as inputs to the program portfolio dialogue. So what we're doing is we're taking very coarse-grained initiatives, agreeing to what those are, and then putting them through the funnel at a portfolio and program level so they get decomposed into smaller chunks of work that get executed back by the team. And we should have feedback all along the way, and I'll show you that. And then you want to identify this picture. I think it's risk, yeah. All right, next one. So, and if you could, go ahead and hit the next animation. So I just want to create these concentric circles. So at the highest level is we have a strategic theme. And strategic themes can take a long time. It may take us years to truly realize the strategic theme. But we can't necessarily wait several years before we get something out in production. So we need to figure out how do we chunk and conquer. This one is key, though, and I think this will be somewhat controversial, is there could be one or more value streams that actually implement a strategic theme. And what I mean by value streams is if we were to go take a look at a process from beginning to end and figure out what are all the parts of the company that need to basically work together to realize that value, is there a way that we can begin to align those as a dedicated group that implements? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But each value stream is going to have a vision. And I like to use the term, if it's a product company, product vision, it could be a service, it could be a service. A vision is really an encapsulation of the intent of that product or service so that everybody understands what it is we're doing. So for those of you in the room, maybe let's pause and we'll kind of go up the food chain here. Is it very clear what the strategic themes are in the organization that you're currently working in?
What does that mean? Does that mean separately, or does that mean, what does strategic team mean?
This is basically a business opportunity that they want to pursue. And it's going to be realized by multiple, groups in the organization. But let's take it down a notch. Let's say a product or service that you're working on right now doesn't have a clear vision.
Don't you find that some companies, when they say strategic team, say things like, we want to be a best in class, and just kind of vague generalities. And that's what I've seen. Our group will throw out these vague ideas that we want to be best software in the world, things like that. But how do we get there? Well, that's kind of empty, right?
Yeah, and I almost think that's actually higher than a strategic theme. I think there could be themes that allow them to get there. And so one of the organizations that I'm working with right now, they are in the retirement space. And so one of their things right now, is the idea of how do we actually, when a customer comes into their investment center, how best can they improve the quality of their high wealth clients and their financial consultants. And so they actually have well articulated, I think there's probably 6 strategic themes that will get them toward the goal of actually retaining those folks and hopefully squeezing more money out. And so, but each one of those strategic themes is going to require a separate value stream, a group of people to get to achieve that. So to your point, it starts out really kind of vague, but as we get in, we get very specific about what are we actually trying to achieve from a quantitative perspective. But a vision statement, how many times have you been on a project and there's no charter? You just get a bunch of people coming together, someone gives a vague 30-minute overview, and in the next 3 to 6 months, people still aren't clear what they're doing. Is anyone familiar with Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore? So he has this concept, I should have brought an example of the elevator page. Basically, it's a simple template to basically put in your syntax of, what type of product are we creating? What is the need that we're fulfilling? Et cetera, et cetera. How are we different than the competition? Well, the vision statement needs to embody that. So if I've got, whether it's 10 people or 1,000 people that are working toward this vision, we all have the same understanding. Otherwise, we're going to have people go off in different directions. And the vision's great. It's good to have a vision. but it's got to be realized by a roadmap. And I'll show you an example of roadmap later. But does anybody use roadmaps today? And that's key. It basically is going to show us how do we chunk and conquer those coarse-grained things that implement the vision. And then once we get down into the roadmap, well, I like to think of roadmap as really defining a series of releases, actually getting something into production on a regular cadence, or an irregular cadence if that adds value. And then each release is going to be subdivided into where we, basically execute on delivering features that prioritize, and we do that through sprints. And so what I want to kind of convey here is that if we can begin to align all these things, we have a feedback cycle. Because as people begin to execute on stories, which are the Agile form of requirements within, let's say, a 2-week cycle, or a 3-week or 4-week, depending on your cadence, if we start to miss our goals and we don't have completed work at the end of those 2, 3, or 4-week cycles, it's going to impact how we're progressing toward large range features that really map to what features and goals do we achieve for release. And if we miss our goals for the release, it impacts our roadmap schedule. So it's a recursive feedback. It's very important and lets us know how we map it towards strategy. Next slide, please. So identify value streams. Has anyone done value stream mapping? Okay. What is it good for in your opinion? And I'll let you read. You can look through the circle of love here. But you can click through the definitions. But how do you use value streams in the past? Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. So you can apply it to any process. Years ago, working at one of the banks down the street, every time we onboarded a new contractor, it was a 2-week process to get a laptop. And people were like, why does it take so long to get somebody a new computer? Well, we decided to go through a value stream analysis when the request was submitted to when that laptop was deployed to the contractor. And through analysis, we realized it does take about 2 weeks. There's a few things we can do to tweak it here and there. And it was a good exercise because now we understood the end-to-end process, we understood the average time. But we also realized the reason that we have contractors coming in or new employees that come in and don't have a laptop is because their manager waited until Friday before the Monday they were going to start. Well, what it does is it allows us to understand that concept of cache. And I'll show you where we're going with this. Now, if we go to the next slide, value streams are key. And so I think we'll do one more. And then the next one. I'll come back to that. But more about value streams. So as you start to basically identify a strategic theme, the challenge usually is at an executive level is how do I basically align all the different groups that I'm going to need to work with to make this happen. And so when we start to talk about Agile organizations and we start to realize, okay, the teams are getting really good at developing or delivering something every 2 weeks. But once they're done with it, it's not going anywhere. Because the step that follows after them to push something into production basically is out of their control. And that could actually take quite a while. So even though they're actually completing work on a regular basis, is it getting out into production? Well, if we can shrink that, what about all the preceding work that actually goes from, okay, when we have a new request, what's the process for that thing you can analyze, prioritize, to the teams in a timely manner so we can actually optimize the flow of that work? And so in other words, implementing Agile at a team level is a self-optimization. Teams get really good at design, code, and test, but does it really get value out in the marketplace faster? And the answer is maybe. If we don't step back and look at an end-to-end flow of work at value stream and figure out how do we tighten it up, that's what we really need to achieve. Does that make sense? And it's easier said than done. But I want to bring that to your opinion. Let's go back one. I don't know why I threw this slide in. So how many of you are good at multitasking? Now we'll go to this slide. Go ahead and show the graphic. How many are good at multitasking? I'll have to say I think women are better than men. I'm just going to throw it out there. At least with my wife, she can do more. She says it's just because she's smarter. Yeah, I believe it. But the thing is, humans suck at multitasking. Okay, we're not, if you look at the sci-fi movies from the 50s where people have giant craniums, maybe we can do it. But really, humans are really bad at it. And so if we realize that at a personal level, that we really can't do more than X number of things at a time, well, otherwise it slows down the overall time of each one of those things as well as the quality. This gets to the heart of what I see a lot of large organizations is, and they still don't get it, is the fact that what happens when you have a group of people that aren't focused on a project, but are focused across multiple projects? What's the natural thing? Basically, everything slows down. So Weinberg, this is actually comes from Personal Combo, but I think this graphic is actually from Gerald Weinberg. There's a 20% overhead associated with it. So if you start to add another project to the team, a fixed capacity, and add another project, that's 20% overhead. And for those of you that ever go through Scaled Agile Framework training, one of the exercises you do, which is very simple, is you've got 3 projects. And each project takes 1 month in duration and takes, and when it's done, it gives you one value of the business. That's it. And so the exercise is do I do all 3 projects concurrently with a single team with the 20% overhead, or do I basically do projects in a serial fashion? Project A first, then B, and C. And when you start to do the analysis, you realize what? Serial's better. It doesn't seem intuitive at first, but the reality of it is in 1 month, you got one thing of value. At the end of 3 months, you've got all 3 units of value done, all 3 projects are done. Whereas if you did the simple math, it added 20% overhead, and 3.6 months is when you finally get all the other 3 projects completed. So not only do you get value done sooner, you get the project done sooner. But this is a hard concept, and when you start to introduce Agile at the team level, especially organizations that are new, the first thing I see is, what do you mean we have to be dedicated to this project? I'm on 6 other projects. And then people don't, that's a cultural symptom. So when we start to get teams dedicated to, let's say, a single focus, they can get work done more quickly. And that's a good thing. But when we start to talk about program, portfolio, and even scaling, beyond that, I see a lot of issues where a lot of this comes from is programs still think it's okay to kick off as many projects as you can with a fixed set of people, and the work's going to get done. And you're going to have a lot of work in flight because nothing is getting done. So that's key, and that's hard. But data will actually show you that by reducing your WIP, finding what that right level of WIP is, not only at a team level, but a program or portfolio level, will actually increase throughput. So that's the general idea. Keep going, next one, please. This is the value stream, and the gentleman out there kind of nailed it on the head. If we start to take it, if you were to look up value stream in Google, you're going to see a lot of pictures that look like industrial type of thing. You have a factory picture, and you have a truck delivering goods. But if you take a look at the little boxes, which are each of the key steps in the process, you'll start to realize that these are actually steps in the development process. And this little wave pattern you see at the bottom is basically denoting at each step in the value stream how much time is actually spent value add. Those are the peaks. And the value add, or the non-value add, are the valleys in between. And you can get more sophisticated because even a step in the process may have time in which there's actually value add and there's also waste. But what's nice about this is the fact that I can begin to not only define an end-to-end process, I can begin to basically get just what is the average time it takes to go through the entire process from beginning to end, and actually come up with an efficiency coefficient. How efficient, how much actual time is adding value, and how much of it is waste. And through analysis, I can draw a future state value stream map and try to figure out how do we begin to reduce the cycle time. So how does this tie back to basically strategic themes? Well, I think a lot of times if we were to actually, if I were a business person at an executive level, I'd want to know at a high level, what's it take to get something done in an organization? Customer request out the door. And what are those course grained steps? On average, how long does it take us to get there? What are the wait states in this thing? Basically, work is sitting idle for no apparent reason, other than we may have an inefficient process. And how do we begin to tighten that up so we can get something to the customer faster? Does anyone, now that you see this picture, does anyone actually have used this in the past?
I was working for a software service company, and we were trying to forecast the roadmap what we were going to deliver, and I went back and looked at historical data about how quickly we'd be able to get features into the product. And I then used that as a heuristic to project how long it would take us to deliver the set of features we wanted to get into the product. It was a very data-centric approach, and the organization was fairly immature in its process maturity, and they struggled to accept that. they said, well, that costs too much and it takes too long. Surely we can, the meetings will continue somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? We'll just yell at people, well, push hard and we'll get that done. And I said, look, I'm looking at the last 3 years of data from the ticketing system. I'm looking at what we've actually delivered. What do you think is different now from what we did before that's radically superior to what we've been doing? And that, he's unwilling to even consider that might be true. And of course, we live on the skip and predicted by history, right?
Yeah.
But in that case, the organization was so unwilling and unable to accept the idea that management by data was helpful. I mean, I think it was extremely valuable. But in that organization, I tried to take an approach like that, it was just completely rejected. So how do you get people to buy in?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, too, is, great question. And that's beyond the scope of technology. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of times, and I learned this from a gentleman I work with, that really he didn't believe anything unless you could show him numbers. And so, in other words, now we're taking, even though we're giving swags, a lot of times people don't even know what the steps of the process are. And that's scary. So number one, just the sheer benefit of getting people together and stressing, let's do this at a high level. People naturally go a mile deep. We don't want that. Number one, it helps us all come to clarity, what is the process? But now we can begin to quantify it, especially if you have leadership that is really driven around dollars and cents. This can actually be easily translated into cost. And hopefully that changes behavior. But what I'm getting here is, when we talk about creating a value stream and actually making a strategic initiative, and the one I was talking about with the financial institution, I mean, this goes not only to a third-party vendor software they have to bring in to make their financial consultants more effective, but also to the people that handle changing the physical space when people come into the finance centers to actually work with a financial consultant. There's multiple streams here of work, but if we're actually going to move the needle, we have to bring the cats across all these different silos in order to go from beginning to end. That's kind of the basic idea. Easier said than done, but if we're truly concerned about our survival, this is important. But like I said, you can use this with anything. Next slide, please. So funding the value stream. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I can direct you to some really good sources. So there is tremendous inefficiency around funding projects. And let's go ahead and hit the next piece. Start funding value. And what I mean by this is, a lot of organizations, we have several in big buildings next door that somebody wants. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through the process of trying to gather and get approval for funding. We're going to spin up a team or decimate a team, build a new team, which is inefficient. Back one. And the idea is that, okay, once I get funding for a project, it takes a lot of energy. And if I start to experience variation in that project and I have to go back and get more money, et cetera, it just creates a huge amount of overhead. And where a lot of the scaling frameworks are going is, at the high level, let's basically fund a value stream. Our initiative is to improve our financial centers. We're going to put X amount of dollars associated to that initiative for a period of time. And then we're going to put the onus on the people that are driving those initiatives to be adult enough to basically prioritize their work in that span of time and use the money wisely, instead of having to basically spin up and fund all the 100 projects that are probably be associated with it. So it's much more efficient if we can basically, almost like thinking of a pie chart, and each pie is a value stream, and funding is approved for that pie, that piece of the pie, that feeds the value stream, and we know what pot of money we have, we know what our run rate is, and through prioritization, we can hopefully have better discipline around delivering cost.
When I think about value stream, I think about tasks related to operation. But when regards to projects, tasks related to defined only short time. What do you mean when you say stop funding project? Which actions are being stopped?
Yeah, so I think, well, one thing is, I think we'll always have something like a project. We can call it, if we define project, basically has a beginning and has an end. But what we're stressing here is with value streams, what we're looking for are things that are going to be long-lived initiatives. It's not going to be a 3-month effort. It's not going to necessarily be a 6-month effort. We see value. If we're going to be we're going to be number one in such and such stream, Yeah,
software.
something BS.
Right.
Get a little more specific around that. But that's going to be something that we're going to be focused on over the next, let's say, 18 to 24 months. What's that bucket of money? And we're now going to get a bunch, a group of people, resources, environments focused on that initiative. And this is and once we've funded that, we can begin to monitor our burn rate. And so instead of doing the minutia of funding every little initiative underneath that, it gets a giant pot of money. That's the general idea. And I'll give you more references on that. There's a lot of good material that's coming out. Some of it proven, some of it not, in terms of how do we actually begin to fund these. But I think projects in some ways can be a bad thing. And the reason for that is, think about when we start to build project teams. We start a team. We go through basically forming, storming, norming, performing. And what happens when the project's over? Where do the people go? They get dispersed. Okay? And I always think that's the equivalent of spending all season in the NBA to get the right 5 players on the court. And then when you go into playoffs, say, hey, let's mix it up. We're going to get a new bunch out. It just doesn't make sense. You spent all this time and energy getting a group of people to operate at a performing level. Let's get a return on that investment. So once we get the right people together, let the project work flow through that team. Yeah, we may need to augment skills, etc., but I think it's a much more efficient model to take that concept and now scale it across multiple dedicated teams to basically a dedicated program.
Quick question for you, Tom. There's one question I have here. You see organizations that are funding different trends. How are you process about value streams? Sometimes it's hard to relate. Let's say you had 3 projects.
Yeah, I've seen it actually both, but I haven't seen a company do this completely well yet from beginning to end. And I think part of that is, I think, stuff that's through politics, lost in translation, or bifurcation. But what I'd like to start to see, and I have started to see, especially in the group I'm in now, where they're really getting good about program level. We've got our pot of money, and projects, if a project request comes in, it's actually treated like a really big story that we're now going to decompose into smaller chunks and feed the existing teams. We're not actually trying to ask for more money for that particular thing. We know what our pot of money is. I think if we can just get from a program level down, good. If we can get all the way back to the enterprise, great. But I think it's a maturity thing. And I haven't seen it. Has anyone else been in companies where they've seen a nice flow from executive level all the way down in terms of strategic? But I think that's what we want to aspire to. And what I see is a lot of vacillation at the top of what do we need to do, what do we need to do? And all that vacillation ends up driving inefficiencies all the way down to team levels. A great example, I don't know what caused the contract layoff at B of A. To be quite frankly, so now you basically, somebody did the math and figured out, okay, we're going to have our contractors go on furlough.
They had target revenue, target control.
And so was that based on like a quarterly or whatever the...
It was the annual plan.
Yeah, exactly. So in other words, it's the tactical versus the strategic, because if you actually sat down and did the math, so somebody went did, it's easy math to figure out how much money are we going to save if we have people go away for 2 weeks and when they come back we reduce their pay. But the harder math is, what is the ramification to all of the work that we had going on and the loss of knowledge, et cetera, which I think would far exceed whatever the top was saying. So they're giving up the strategic for the tactical. Next slide, please. So this is just you've seen this in many different forms, but once we actually know from a theme perspective what we want to do, and we have identified, okay, the value stream for the organization to enable that, then we need to get very good about a clear articulation of what is the vision, and I'm watching the clock here, so we're okay. A clear articulation of the vision. It can be an elevator pitch like Jeffrey Moore, and I apologize I didn't give you an example. Some people use various techniques. I think just a good project charter is enough to get people clarity. Some people use, business model canvas or lean canvas. If you guys are familiar with that, to clearly articulate what it is we're trying to do. Then we develop that roadmap. What is our time frame? And we don't want to wait till the end of 18 months to deliver something. That's risky. Ideally, we not only want to have these short 2-week cycles of feedback, but ideally we want to get something into production sooner and maybe do that multiple times so we can start to realize value sooner, and also to make changes if we need to. We need to have a release cadence. So for those of you that are doing Agile today, do you guys have a defined release cadence? Bi-monthly, quarterly, whatever that sweet spot is. What's the benefit of having that? Yeah, we can fill it in.
We also ship things in production that's completed. So things aren't completed by a certain time frame, it waits for the next time to train and apply.
Okay,
That will distribute.
yeah.
Good way to not worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I like what you said about the release train. That's kind of, it sounds like you're doing some elements of safe. Yeah, but the idea is this release, this heartbeat. We have a heartbeat, bless you, on a 2-week cycle. And that heartbeat's good because now we know team by team, what is their average, in essence, productivity. But now we can see it at release level. And I think it's good to have milestones in dates. That's not going to change. But what goes in that release may change based on what's actually completed. And sometimes I see a lot of Agile teams get really good at cranking out stuff every 2 weeks, but they do a really bad job of actually getting something into production and do strategic planning. And then we have the iteration, which you're familiar with. If I use the term iteration, just think sprint. It's just sprint is synonymous with Scrum. Iteration is just generic to Agile. And then we have our daily stand-up. Are you guys doing stand-ups? Okay. Why are those important?
And also,
Pardon? Good, good.
and also, if there's any issues that I have to give attention to.
Yeah. Like working with this guy?
It's a chunk of it.
That's a chunk of it?
That's
That's
big
an
chunk.
impediment.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do projects get late?
One day at a time.
Oh, man. Exactly. And so in a waterfall world, we don't know we're late until we get to the latter part of the cycle test. Well, here, we're going to start to get a feel for if that canary is starting to get a little nauseous and fall over. Hence, for those of you that used to work in the coal mine, that analogy will resonate. But the idea is that's our early indication system, our early feedback. So are we tracking to our sprint goals on a daily basis? Are we getting it done? Because if we're not, it's going to impact what we can deliver in the iteration. It's going to impact potentially what's in the release, the roadmap, the vision, and eventually our strategic initiative. So I just want to say this is Agile is all about planning, different levels.
Go ahead.
Oh, different levels, but it's all accurate at that specific level. Based on feedback, we alter our plan. And our destination is not going to change. Just like a road trip from Charlotte to Seattle. If I know what my destination is, I've got a budget, and I've got a time frame. Ideally, those things aren't going to alter, but how I get there is going to change based on road conditions, accidents, etc. So that's a feedback loop. And so I just kind of want to emphasize that. Go ahead, sir.
I was going to mention the feedback loop is sometimes not as good as you would like it to be. Like especially if you're doing a daily stand-up meeting with offshore people, because they never like to have problems until 2 days before the meeting.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. So that kind of gets into maybe some cultural differences.
And that's where I go into the cultural difference. They don't ever want to say they can't figure this out. Even though the person sitting next to them has done the same thing 10,000 times over, he's afraid to tell the other guy, hey, how do you do this?
Well, I think that here's the thing, though. We get to, hopefully, an environment where people feel, hopefully, that they, number one, we have transparency. Two, that people, hopefully, feel more comfortable with, reality. And there's trust.
And one of the things I've learned in conducting these meetings is to keep management out of it. Because if there's a manager on the thing, everything's perfect. Everybody's going out and happy.
Oh, of course. So we start to think about, if we basically have funded a strategic initiative, and there's project-like work that comes in, well, maybe we just get a different label. In other words, maybe that project is now a new feature that gets prioritized with everything else that this team is eventually going to get exposed to. So through prioritization, it'll drive what we need to work on. At what time do we need to decompose it into small chunks? And what is it costing us per iteration? Which we can easily extrapolate and figure out on a release-by-release basis, what does it cost us to get something out there. Next slide. So learning to value feedback is important, other than burning your hand. I can't remember the value of this line. Keep going. Maybe there's some meaningful text. Oh, inspect and adapt, yeah. So hopefully we quickly learn. The sooner we realize that we get burned, sometimes failure is a good thing. I'm not the proponent, but I think that there's, if you do
It's a good thing
something,
to learn from.
yeah, we'll learn from it. Hopefully this person learns that this is quite painful and they don't do it again. We'll do something else, like stick their hands in the oven. I think you guys have drank the Kool-Aid on that one. Keep going. Okay, minimal viable product. Where you really heard that term? This is a term that I see used and abused. But the idea here, and this comes from Lean Startup, Eric Reese, or is it Rice? Is it Reese? Yeah, like Reese's Pieces. Okay. But the idea is, what is that smallest thing that we can do to actually determine if our idea is viable? And this is important. And this is the company I'm working with right now. This is very key to their, they want to be more innovative. So we may not wait until we have a full bang application with all the defined capabilities ready to rock and roll. Because we may realize by the time we get that out the door that was a crappy idea to begin with. So the whole premise of Lean Startup is, if you've got an idea, use, inspect, and adapt to determine if that is the right idea. And so it doesn't have to be, functioning software. It could be something written out as simply on a napkin, something that's enough for someone to understand, an early adopter, the intent of what you're trying to do, and to get feedback on it. And based on that feedback, it's either going to support you that this is a viable idea with some variation, or you may realize it's not a good idea at all, and maybe we need to basically pivot to something else.
One of the things we discovered as we were trying to do this for enterprise, not just stock enterprises, customer said, I want this, the minimum viable product is this. And I was a startup, we had this much budget. And what we found was when we delivered this quickly and effectively and solved what they had, they were very active buyers from us. Even though they told me, they swore, we couldn't possibly buy it unless it was this big. And oh my gosh, you can get that. Wait, how much is that? So that's, sometimes it's smaller than you think.
Yeah, that's a great point. So next slide, please. So this is from Heinrich Nyberg, and I'm probably mangling his name. Yes, sir.
Can I make another point of that?
No, we've already moved on. No, yeah.
This idea from what I mentioned is coming from the thinking in the toolbox. It thinks when you define ideas from data, it's more critical thinking.
Oh, so data-driven decision?
Yeah, but when it's creativity is coming when you are making a new box, which you don't have a data to act on.
Gotcha.
So
That's what you're saying.
So now the question is, what type of idea are they looking for? Are they looking for creative idea, or are they innovative idea, or are they looking for new ideas? That's the question. What
Okay,
type
good
of
point.
idea would
Yeah,
that
that's
be
interesting.
innovative or that
I would say that maybe there is no data at this point. So in other words, maybe it's a new idea, but in order to get data, feedback, let's get it out there. Now what happens is I see a lot of product owners misusing this term, and to your point, Tom, they want all 100 things. It's the minimal viable product. The reality of it is, no, maybe your minimal viable product is this, and we'll get it out there and get the feedback, and early adopters are going to like it and we want more, then we can add more stuff. But we can't wait till all 100 things are out there, because that could be very wasteful. What if we're moving in the wrong direction? And I wrote notes before. I'm supposed to bring up some statistics. What percentage of features are rare or are never used in software applications on average? It's 45%. Rarely, if ever, used, or 65%. So why spend all this time, building everything out if it's just going to be ignored? The other thing, here's another cheesy one. How much? Yeah, I won't bother. But 45%. So if you think about your favorite application, someone earlier was, I think it was Tom Brady, was using InDesign to build out the printed materials, which look great. There's probably 45% of that application or more that he'll never use. Maybe nobody uses. It's there. Someone spent a lot of time and energy. If we had actually, even at a feature-by-feature basis, started to get feedback, and I see USD teams and companies doing this, before we put it out at xyz.com, we're going to go to the cafeteria and have our own employees start to give us feedback on very simple designs to determine should we go left or right. And based on their feedback, we'll take it to the next level. So it's an early warning system. But let's go to Heinrich Nyberg's picture. In the old world, if somebody wanted a mode of transportation, and we thought in our mind they wanted a car, well, they're going to have to wait till we get all 4 steps done, because they can't just do anything with a wheel or a wheel and chassis, etc. So what the whole MVP is, people want a mode of transportation. Well, can we give them the simplest thing that's going to work to meet their needs, a skateboard? Once they get the skateboard, then we can evolve it over time to get to the car. Okay? So there again, I think a lot of times, we've got to have that product owner or that our customer along the ride with us, because people don't know what they want until you show them something. Just like we're trying to get the cocktail dress. The other thing is that maybe something simple is all we really need. You don't have to spend all this energy on this cool thing.
Now, how do you, the only industry I'm working with is highly regulated, like a lot of banks, right? How do you kind of get around it? We work with a client and they're in analysis paralysis, right? They're moving around all that. And they said, we just want vanilla. They said, great, we'll do vanilla, we'll start it down the road. All of a sudden they said, well, we've got to comply with this and this. Now we need to go back and do some more analysis. So the way they do minimally viable product is, it's got to have every regulatory development. How do you get around that?
Well, that's a great point. Now, the question is, let's go ahead if you don't mind, because I think we'll start to touch on it. Let's skip this. Skip that. Defining features. So, if you don't mind, go a couple more. I want to get to Q&A. Keep going. There, way to shortest job first. So, is anyone familiar with this term? Okay. So basically, it's a prioritization mechanism. I think it's a good example we have this laundry list of features. And let's just define whatever you want. Think of features as a really big story. So there's multiple stories. So when we start to prioritize features, there's probably multiple criteria that we need. In the banking space, one of those criteria, anytime there's government regulation, is going to be a time. So of these 100 things that they want, which ones have a time criticality component that have to get done by a certain date, otherwise they'll get fined. And maybe that shrinks that number. But in your case, like going back to your example, did every feature have some sort of time component associated with it?
Generally, these guys know time boxing was something they didn't like. They just wanted things to.
And magically happen?
Right, and the time was not, trying to time box them was like, I don't know, hand over cello.
Okay. And there's other techniques like Kanban that get us out of time boxing, but I think what we want to take a look at is prioritization. So if we go to the next slide, I think this does a better job. So weighted shortest job first, and this comes from Donald Reinert's. I think it's where it originated, and Dean Leffingwell and nothing followed or added it. But the idea is that at feature level, core string things, we have to look a little bit more than just one variable. And so weighted shortest job first basically takes into account what's our perceived business value of something. This next one, though, and this is critical from Reinert's. He's got a great book called Product Development Flow. It's a wonderful book. It'll put you right to sleep. I don't think it has anything explicitly stated about Agile in it, but it's all about Agile. But the idea is, how do we optimize the creation of stuff? And he brings up this notion of cost of delay. In other words, there's a time criticality to what we do. And if we start to think about maybe like Siri or the first iPhone, in other words, there was probably a time criticality associated with coming out with the first iPhone before the competition because they wanted to get to the market first with the touchscreen. If they delayed, Samsung, somebody else would come to market. Well, time criticality not only to get maybe market opportunity to market, but to your point, we could add in there if there was a critical deadline from a government perspective. So right now, if something's got a high time criticality, that's going to make this formula result in a number that's going to be larger, which means that thing's going to have higher priority. So what this basically says is you take business value perception, time criticality perception, RR stands for risk reduction, or opportunity exploitation, and you divide it by job size. And the basic premise is, and you can see on the right example, if I have two things that are of equal value, do the one that can get done more quickly, because you're going to get the value faster. And you can either follow this formula, weighted job first. I've worked with some groups that they made their own numerator based on what was important to them. But when you start to have a stack of feature level things, you need some disciplined way to prioritize them, other than just emotion. And this forces us to actually put some numbers behind it. Now, these don't have to be precise numbers. You can still use relative estimation, maybe a Fibonacci sequence, to do it. But what happens is start to have a conversation across a cross-functional group of people at a program management level or higher about the value of something. And hopefully, at the end of this conversation, we will actually have a punch list of priorities, and that'll drive everything else. Does that make sense? I don't know if that kind of goes with your head. Now, we're about basically how much we have 15 minutes left. One, the slides that we skipped over, we had an example of a vision, we had an example of a roadmap. I think you guys, we can always go back to that, but let's keep going. We talked about release planning and the decomposition of taking things like features, which I would imagine are going to spend multiple sprints. You know, depending on, there's multiple definitions out there, but usually features are completed within a release. But I need to figure out, okay, what features and i.e. stories are going to be in each release. So we understand what the size of that release is. And as we start to go through and execute on that release sprint by sprint, we're going to get a better sense of how are we tracking through those items. So the next slide, I think, gets into executing on the release, going from basically in progress to done, and then the next slide should go into sprints. You guys are familiar with this. Where I wanted to get to is if we keep going, is to start to talk about, next slide please, measurements. So at the program level or higher, what kind of metrics are you guys using today to measure the progress of ultimately your release? But what about at maybe even rolling up to a strategic level? Okay, so when we say velocity, is that a team velocity or is it an aggregate of all the work across the multiple teams? Good. How do you guys handle that? You just do an average?
Yeah, we don't do it particularly well or particularly scientific. It's just an average of how much each team calculates the velocity.
Are you guys using any type of like spreadsheets or whatever to aggregate the data?
We pull it out of the
Okay. But the idea is, go ahead. But the idea is now that if we're working on shipping something every 2 months, let's say that's our release cycle, we can get a sense of what is the capacity across all of the teams per release. So we know the amount that we can load up based on that historical information. And then as we execute on it, we can see how are we tracking toward the completion of that work. And we also know the run rate of each team, each sprint, and the aggregate across the release.
You said their velocity per release, that's a swing over timeline release.
Correct. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, Joe's right. So we start to think about average velocity at the sprint level, 2-week cycles. The reason we keep a consistent sprint length is so that the teams know what the heartbeat is, what it's like to work in a 2-week time frame. So thanks, Joe. The clarification at a release level is could we get into a rhythm of quarterly, bi-monthly, monthly, whatever works in the world, because now we can have a heartbeat around release and start to have a velocity. Otherwise, you're right. If we go from quarterly to 2 months back to quarterly, it throws the dynamics off. But I think there's some important things here. I'll get back to release predictability. The percent of number of features planned, accepted, what architectural stuff's there, the number of stories planned and accepted at a more granular level. These come out of the Scale Agile framework, but I think they're good indicators. And if we go to some of the next slide here, do you guys maintain a release burn up or burn down chart? Good. This is important, and it really helps us avoid that waterfall thing where the 11th hour we realize the poop's hit the fan, we're not tracking. We'll know sooner rather than later that we're tracking. And let's take a look at this example. Oh, keep going. Oh, don't change it yet. But you know by day 3 whether you're hosed?
Yeah, I mean, you can pretty much predict.
Okay, now that's at a sprint level. So this is yeah. So hopefully we'll know sooner. Because usually, we don't find out traditionally until the 11th hour when we get into the test. Well, now we're doing a design, build, and test cycle every 2 weeks. In other words, these are sprints at the bottom. And we've got a forecast of when we think we're going to hit our target, but we also have reality. So if we take a look at this, is the team behind or ahead of schedule? We're not. But we have real data now to show it, and we realize, hey, we probably need to go maybe a couple more sprints out if the date can be moved. If not, then we probably should de-scope.
You tell me you can start doing that. That's parsing your waterfall, right? Because you're getting working software on the plan.
Exactly, that's the key. If we keep moving work from one sprint to the next, we're not hitting that definition. It kind of becomes meaningless. So you're right, we're hitting working software. But what I like about this is I can start to have hard conversations sooner rather than later that, hey, we're behind.
But the other thing too is the stories that have been accepted have been accepted by the product owner, so you're getting quality Okay, and you're getting stuff that they approve, we've met their acceptance criteria, so that's better than everything else.
Sure. Yeah, and where I'm going with this is if we can, if the next slide, if we can actually start to track things. So this is a simple chart. I think I stole this from version 1. These are easier to do in Excel. But if I know what my punch list of features are that support a release, and that release supports a roadmap, and that roadmap supports a strategic initiative, there's a lot of wonderful tools out there that you can actually see at the micro or macro level how are we doing. And so what I want, we can basically see right away that these are complete. This is in progress. This one is in progress, but it's behind. So in other words, we can basically have a very good macro view of how we progress it. And all this is doing is basic math. If a feature is 80 story points, and 75 of those story points are complete, then whatever that percentage is what's remaining. And how does that look according to the timeline? And we can basically put in some basic, if it's behind, or maybe looking for 50% complete, but there's only 2 more sprints left in the release, then that's probably red.
But when you're looking at a high level, you don't know these story points behind that, or these story points are taking longer, because different teams are going to get paid. One story point for team A could be 1 week, one story point for team B could be 3 weeks.
And that's why I think just using averages helps to kind of smooth things out. But you're right. So if we start to see that this thing's falling behind, and if I were working at the program level, I probably want to zoom in and figure out, okay, what can we do to help? What's going on here that we need to move the needle on that particular item?
So this is the way you mentioned and so forth, is all aesthetic mindset. All it's going to do is allow the managers to look at the sooner and still be the depth margin. So how we want that. That's what aesthetic mindset. Another way of looking at it is in order to get more top-down control by the people making it. Another way of looking at it is that it will bottom up. How between those two things, how would you react to it?
I think, well, and that's a great point. I would have to say that hopefully we've got to a culture of trust. And that's a hard thing. But the idea, I think it's both ways. I think, this is hopefully if we're accurate about meeting our definition of done, so the data is accurate, and that the team is being responsible about taking on the right amount of work from sprint to sprint, that they're working at their capacity. And hopefully if senior leaders realize in order to optimize flow through the system, we want a sustainable rate, and this is reality.
Also, just the fact that it's so visible, right? You show that any manager understands that's right. Red is bad, and they got it. You look really good.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
But from a servant leader perspective, if I were the evil dictator, I could have these people executed. Or if I were a servant leader, I could go and say, how can we help you? What's causing, are you dependent? Is it a third-party dependency, et cetera? Now, I did a poor job here. I should have taken it 1 level higher.
But the other thing too is people at that level looking back at failure, they don't, a lot of them don't understand the concepts and the fundamental agile change or some change.
Well, no, I
That's
think
the organizational change with the chip. And a lot of those middle managers are still looking at their, what they want to do in life.
And that becomes a communication issue because, so in other words, ideally, if we can all agree that working software is a true measure of progress and kind of start to show why are these metrics important, can we educate the different levels of management to understand that this is actually a better barometer of where we are than what we used to use. And so I see it as almost an incomplete implementation of Agile. If the teams are using Agile metrics, that they go through metrics gymnastics to get them into a traditional waterfall approach. We need to go full length.
And I'll take one step further from what you said. I think it's really we can use these measures to show them that we're working on that software. And they can't be just, they can be accurate as much as the company we're working on what's software. It's just less than they really wanted. But there are other solutions to that than just working on the hard.
Correct. And if you go to the last slide, because I know we're almost out of time, this is what we want to avoid. Oh, you did?
Well, I was just gonna, back on the previous slide, I was just gonna, inquire, go back to talk about trust and percentage of completion of all of this. I'm
think too, when we start, I pulled the slide of definition of done around where they kind of feeds us, and part of that definition of done is, you know, that quality is a component as well. So you're right, because if we adopt Agile, we may just be really good at making garbage. And these may actually turn out to be metrics that show, yeah, we're placating management that we're done, but what happens is once we get this in production and quality issues come in, then we'll realize how well we're working, and we weren't working well. So this is assuming a lot, but one of it is that that quality is baked in, because we're not going to have time to necessarily do it over if we take, you know, in other words, that concept around technical debt. And I think I want to stress here too is let's get back to the view that's throwing up, and we'll close there. I want to leave you with a lasting image. I don't know if he has thrown up or he's about to, but this is key. Working at a sustainable pace. Studies show time and again, if you work beyond 50 hours a week, it doesn't mean you're more productive. Not that you guys should think you're start arguing for half that time, even though I think this guy, you don't work, what, 10 or 20 hours a week? But I think that 50 hours a week, we actually, fatigue sets in, we get sloppy, and all of a sudden we inject more defects in what we're doing, and it causes rework. So the key is sustainable pace. And so over time, if we can get through the dysfunction and people become agile vertically, we can realize is that they respect the capacity of the team, that the team's not gaming the system, that they're building quality in, and they feed the work at just the right level. So I shouldn't say feed, the team pulls it in based on their capacity. And I think I apologize, you have 3 minutes for questions.
We've been asking them throughout the discussion.
Okay. Well, that's it.
I got a question. Who's the top dog? Who's the best reason to come to Southern Friday this year?
This year.
Or is it just all?
It's all good. Here's the dilemma you're going to face when you come to Southern Fried Apple. You physically can only be at 5 places during the time. And every one of them is damn good. But the number one reason to come is we always have fried chicken. Fried chicken all day? That'd be kind of gross. It's all day. And for those of you that are PDU addicts, I think you get 5.25.
Mike, you go to my session, so
Oh, I should have said yeah.
I know it'll be the best, right?
No, actually, to be honest with you, the team that actually did the choosing or something said they were off it. All right, thanks.